Good and decent people of YouTube, welcome to Political Drain, where we sift through the sewage at the end of a long pipeline of corporate media in order to expose the liars and the charlatans hell-bent on manipulating you for power and for profit. My name is Bruce Lively, and no, you're not crazy.
All right, welcome. I just wanted to say, welcome to the end of democracy. We're here to overthrow it completely. We didn't get all the way there on January 6th, but we will endeavor to get rid of it and replace it with this right here. We'll replace it with this.
So it's funny. I mean, funny, interesting, not funny, haha. That of all four pillars of Project 2025, pillar number 4 is the shortest. You're looking at it, actually. That's it. And quite frankly, as proclamations to end democracy and replace it with a fascist dictatorship goes, it's got to be up there with the shortest in the recorded history of mankind. Pillar 4, the proclamation, the plan of execution, the 180-day plan to bring in the new order, is a title, a run-on sentence, and a statement too short to be considered a paragraph by any standards. And even worse is just a reiteration of the first sentence I just mentioned. But the reason why it's so short is simple. Because the playbook they will use to turn a democracy into a dictatorship in about 180 days isn't something you let the other team see before the game starts. Unfortunately for us, good and decent people of YouTube, the game started 3 years ago. And we're behind. All of this is just me trying to throw you a Hail Mary in the end zone, guys, because we can't afford to lose. Let's talk about Pillar 4. So, what do I mean by the game started 3 years ago? Well, as you can imagine, to do what's necessary to reach a place of no return in about 180 days in a democracy that's had its own constitution, traditions, and entrenched separation of powers for over 200 years isn't something you just stumble into, okay? In order to do something that ambitious without falling flat on your face, you're gonna need 3 things. Check it out. You're gonna need personnel in every possible position of power, loyal only to the dictator and nothing else. Just being honest. Number 2, you're going to need complete control of the masses by any and all means of the word control, and the erosion of political guardrails and institutions that keep the separations of power intact. And that last one, number 3, that started January 6, 2021. But that was publicly. Behind the scenes, the mechanisms necessary to start, if not fully accomplish, the erosion of the guardrails and the institutions has already started. And it's in place in battleground states as we speak, people.
And have been watching now for 3 years what looks like dress rehearsals for this fall. If a local official refuses to certify a local election, that means those votes just don't get counted. They don't get moved up to the county level or from the county level up to the state level. And it just screws up everything, right? And it can prevent certification of the entire state if you do it in a large enough county. You know, like one of the big counties in Georgia, for example. And this is exactly what's happening. Rolling Stone points out a startling number of Republicans have refused to certify election results in recent years, despite their legal obligation to do so. In at least 15 instances since November 2020, local Republican officials in 8 states have refused to certify election results.
Just before the Thanksgiving break, we got the worrying but also totally inevitable feeling news about Republican officials in 3 different counties in Georgia deciding that they would refuse to certify this year's election results. These are Republican officials in 3 different counties who refused to vote to certify their county's local election results from earlier this month. These were run-of-the-mill elections, run-of-the-mill election results. There was not necessarily anything wrong with these elections or with the results. The elections basically went off just fine. It's just that they're Republican elections officials, and so why would they vote to certify an election result? This is just kind of becoming the default Republican position now.
Has obtained recordings of GOP operatives and their plans to essentially steal elections moving forward.
So what's different about this? Well, number one, these poll workers are being trained by the Republican Party, and they are coordinating with the Republican Party. Now that is a potential problem, because what the Republican Party is teaching them is how to challenge and slow down voting in the Democratic area. So then number two, they said, oh, we're not necessarily going to challenge a voter. Okay, let me show you a slide from their presentation. It's graphic 5, okay, and get a load of this slide. It's called How to Challenge a Voter. Okay, and it explains all the different ways that you challenge a voter.
In Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. And these are all states that could go, one way or the other in the presidential election. Republican officials have refused to certify or delayed certification of results for the election of local, state, and national candidates.
Local Republican elections officials in some of these cases over the last few years have demanded audits and hand recounts. And then even when all the audits and recounts show the same results, they've still refused to certify the election. Because it's not about what the voters have actually voted for. It's about setting up a system that can deliver only one possible result.
What looks like dress rehearsals for this fall.
Now, even when I tell you that every single MAGA numbnut who attacked the Capitol supposedly in the name of election security, but has nothing to say about this, is a blistered, throbbing, pus-filled pimple resting squarely on the ass of this country, I don't think the gravity of what you just saw can be overstated. And even with that being said, there's still another guardrail and institution that's in the fourth quarter of its assault by these maniacs. You know, the only profession protected by the Constitution, the Fourth Estate.
Undermine the free press. As Hitler well understood, a fascist needs to control the flow of information. Trump has been attacking the press for years.
They are truly the enemy of the people.
And he's threatening to punish news outlets whose coverage he dislikes. He has helped to reduce trust in the media to such a historic low that his supporters now view him as their most trusted source of information.
These are just dishonest, terrible people. I'm telling you that. Terrible people.
It almost isn't news that President Trump launched yet another attack tonight in his relentless battle against the media, except for what else happened today. A California man was arrested for making violent threats against the Boston Globe. In one of 12 calls to the paper, Robert Chain allegedly said, "You're the enemy of the people. We're going to kill every effing one of you." Who else has been calling the media the enemy? President Trump.
I called the fake news the enemy of the people, and they are.
The president's attacks are nothing new.
Because they are the fake, disgusting news.
But the fear now is that they could fuel violence. In another call, Chain allegedly said, "As long as you keep attacking the president, I will continue to threat, harass, and annoy the Boston Globe."
And that brings us to the second necessity for Pillar 4 to even have a chance. If you're going to get this done, you better have complete control of the masses by any and all means of the word control. And brainwashing is the first control. Now, this is done through fear,
Where 51% of the population fear being victims of terrorism, 65% of Trump supporters hold that fear. 63% of people are afraid of being victims of violent crime, compared to 75% of Trump supporters. And fear of foreign influence reigns supreme for Trump supporters. 83% say that the American way of life needs to be protected against foreign influence, compared to 55% of Americans overall. Polling shows that Trump supporters are more fearful of crime and terror and are generally more wary of foreign influence and social change, far and above the average for most Americans. This fear is being stoked and taken advantage of by Trump and his ilk. When asked, many Trump supporters say that Trump is the answer, that he is capable of bringing order and control to the chaotic and fast-changing world they're terrified of. And they say this because that's exactly what Trump is telling them. More than any other politician we've seen, Trump is uniquely able to wield these fears in both concrete and abstract ways to ignite his base of supporters and then present himself as the only possible solution.
And this is done through tribalism.
The threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within.
Denigrating his political opponents on the left as, quote, vermin during a Veterans Day speech in New Hampshire.
We will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
When Trump won the nomination, I fell right in line. Because when you think the other side is evil, you can't imagine voting for anyone other than your own guy.
But with Hillary, there's not even the same universe. I mean, she is an abject, psychopathic demon from hell that as soon as she gets into power is going to try to destroy the planet.
So I happily voted for Trump. I thought I had some unconventional wisdom that other women just didn't. Yeah, no.
And tribalism easily turns to another brainwashing technique of social hierarchy, sticks, and carrots. That's what I'm going to call it. It pretty much means not being seen as one of the group. Knowing how quickly the cult turns on anyone who doesn't believe every word from the mouth of the leader. Pointing out any other truth or asking any questions is immediate grounds for suspicion and puts you right on the fast track to being a pedophile and a Satan worshiper. That's it. No middle ground, not even just a difference of opinion. Any dissent, gone.
Realizing that everything you thought was true was a lie is a tough realization, but a necessary one. Yes, I have family and friends who still worship Trump, and yes, they have blocked me on Facebook, but that's okay, because they don't want to be reached. They don't want to have a dialogue. They just want to live in a safe world of conspiracy theories and denial. For those that can't be reached and want to be reached, I think it's important to maintain respect on both sides, because just like how I thought Democrats were evil and we were the good guys, my mind changed. Their mind can change too. Now, my advice to Trumpers is get the hell out of there while you can. You probably know deep down that he's unfit. Don't be afraid to say it.
And the last brainwashing technique is the most famous of all fascist playbooks, people. It's a promise of nostalgia. The rose-colored glasses view of a world that never really ever existed, but somehow everything was just better back then. Where did you think Make America Great came from? Besides stealing it from Ronald Reagan, that is, of course. It's a fascist trope, started by Mussolini himself. So, controlling the masses is key, and brainwashing is the first control. And just to recap, that's done through fear, tribalism, social carrots and sticks, and the elusive promise of nostalgia that exists only in the mind of the duped. But what if you're not one of the duped? What about the rest of us? Well, for us, the second control is violence. Non-state actors get sanctioned violence. Remember, Proud Boys stand back and stand by. Well, they're just one of hundreds of militia groups sanctioned by no one, but salivating for the day that they can be deputized and act on all of their incel, basement-dwelling, self-hating, constantly nagging anger at the back of their head and the violence spurred on by unresolved mommy issues and dicks the size of tadpoles. And they're led by hurting service members with untreated PTSD, depression, and very real rage from a life that left them behind. Oh, and don't forget the police officers sending racist pictures around the office, laughing at Black and Latino bodies being abused. Or even the Black and Latino officers who learn to hate themselves to get along. Yeah, they joined one too. Does that surprise you? Tell me, what did you think all the guns and the late night training in the tick-infested woods was for? In South Georgia and Tennessee, in upstate New York, in West Virginia, West Connecticut, in Upper Orange County, and in the deserts of Arizona, Washington State, Waco, Texas, Columbine. What did you think all the guns were for?
Hitler and Mussolini relied on their vigilante militias to intimidate voters and local officials. We watched Trump try to do the same in 2020.
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
Republican election officials testified to the threats they faced when they refused Trump's demands to falsify the election results.
During Hitler's rise to power, there was a group that played an extremely significant and brutal part in his rise to the position of Führer. The SA were integral to the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, and their violent antics would be pivotal in establishing Nazi rule over Germany. When World War I came to a conclusion in 1918 and Germany surrendered, there were a number of independent paramilitary groups or units that plagued the defeated country. These were known as the Freikorps and were made up of prominently First World War veterans who had returned from combat. The Freikorps fought against communism and other groups that they believed were to blame for the German defeat of the conflict, under the leadership of Hitler. At the time, speaking in public about politics was a rather dangerous thing to do in Germany, so the original task of the SA was to protect their prized asset Adolf Hitler, as such speeches and gatherings would often attract communists, the SA's enemies, and would result in ferocious brawls and violence. This would play into Hitler's hands, as the members of the SA were made up mostly of old military, who certainly knew how to handle themselves, and they knew how to deal with these events when it kicked off. When fights would break out, the police under the Weimar government were usually unable to cope and were powerless, and it would be the SA who would restore law and order.
Oh, and there's more. The third mass control, state violence, and the restriction of movement.
Right. He also promised a door-to-door effort to collect migrants and put millions of them in enormous detention camps within moments. That's a verbatim quote, within moments of taking office.
House Bill 1105 allows for police officers in the state of Georgia to stop and arrest anyone that they suspect is an illegal immigrant. We know Hispanics are all different shades. So that means if I'm walking down the street, a police officer can stop me if they suspect that I might be an illegal immigrant. They can stop me and ask me to prove that I am an American citizen. In other words, the slave patrol. Greg Abbott signed a similar bill in the state of Texas. And Governor Ron DeSantis has also signed into law a very similar bill.
And just so you get it, this is why they keep calling immigrants invaders and invasion force. Because that language gets you to do the Insurrection Act on day one, or war powers on day one. And the last control is the oldest in the books, people. The original opiate of the people, killer of kings, queens, and peasants alike. Good and decent people of YouTube, the rise of Christian nationalism is not an accident. Religion is the final control. It's a dose of brainwashing with the sting of life after death. An unseen God that tells you not to believe your lying eyes. And the pastor who tells you hell awaits the person who doesn't go along with the dear leader. And if you don't believe how quickly that concoction can be turned into the scariest, most potent weapon against democracy without a single word of dissent or even a question from the people you know and love, your neighbors you thought would never agree to such a thing, I take you back to the beginning of my video. Remember this?
All right, welcome. I just wanted to say, welcome to the end of democracy. We're here to overthrow it completely. We didn't get all the way there on January 6th, but we will endeavor to get rid of it and replace it with this right here. We'll replace it with this right here.
Amen.
That's right, because all glory is not to government, all glory to God.
People, so when I tell you that Pillar 4 is the shortest pillar because they don't want to give the game away to the other team. And when I say that the game itself started at least 3 years ago, and we're just now getting in at the fourth quarter, I wish it were hyperbole, but the truth is, Project 2025 is the brainchild of the Heritage Foundation, and if you can believe it, they've been trying and gaining ground at this sort of thing since the 80s. This isn't some upstart incel 4chan midnight manifesto. These guys have been laying the groundwork, managing the masses, incrementally changing and writing the rules in just such a way to take advantage of just such a time as this. Part 5 is the conclusion. And no, I didn't forget about the first necessity to fulfilling the authoritarian wet dream of these maniacs. In the conclusion, I will explain how the past 3 pillars already has that covered. This is my Hail Mary. If you don't catch it, we all lose. I'll see you on the next one.